So in Australia, $100 down at your local bottle-o doesn't go anywhere near as far as it used to. We have some of the highest alcohol taxes in the world, and that hits you particularly hard if you're a whiskey enthusiast. Now, I'm relatively new on my whiskey journey myself, but I'm going to talk about some of the whiskies that were really great gateways for me that you might not have heard of, that I think are a much better pick than some of you kind of Johnny Walkers or Chiverses or some of the ones you might see on the shelf. I'm going to go through 5 now that I enjoy, that I think are really good bang for buck. So hey, welcome to the channel. My name's Caleb, and this is my first ever video for this channel, Whisky Down Under. I've been into whiskey for the last few years now, and I watch a lot of YouTube channels, and people might be in America or New Zealand or the UK, and I find they'll recommend these bottles and I'll go check the price here, and it's so much more expensive than what they're saying. So a lot of the context of this channel is I'm trying to keep this as things that you can find down at your local Dan Murphy's, Liquorland, BWS, etc. for a decent price, because things do seem to land a bit differently in the Australian market. And just to give that context, if you are wondering why whiskies are so expensive here and why the Australian industry has such a hard time producing whiskey for an affordable price, our taxes are ridiculous. Australia has the 3rd highest taxes in the world for alcohol. And just to put that into perspective, on your average bottle, about $30 is going straight to the government. So, you know, that should put it into perspective why you might see some spirits recommended by an overseas channel. Go to buy it here in Oz, it's double or triple the price. So this video here, this isn't going to be so much for whiskey enthusiasts. This is going to be for people that are new to whiskey or have maybe tried it a little bit but just want some more recommendations. Gateway whiskies, bottles that are an affordable price, tasty, yeah, and just were great starting points, and that ones that I've been able to get behind and have been a part of my journey, or the types of bottles that will go on to be a daily sipper, you know, something affordable to be on your shelf because you might not want to be drinking your most expensive spirits all the time. So for starters, I'm going to go for a blended whiskey. Now, look, don't buy into the bullshit. Like, things don't need to be a single malt to be a tasty whiskey. There's some great blended whiskies out there. Of course, yeah, most of the best whiskies are single malts, but look, there's some great blended ones as well. So you see the word blended, don't be put off by that, because some of them are still really good. So the one I'm going to start with, Monkey Shoulder. This one here, it's a Scotch whiskey. It's a mix of Speyside whiskies, which I have kind of realized along my journey is my favorite region for whiskey, Speysides. And this is a blend of a few different Speysides. Look, if you're buying it in a gift for someone, comes in a pretty nice bottle, especially for the price. I actually only got onto this kind of recently. I'd always seen it around, but just never bothered grabbing it. But this one here, at the moment, just under $60 at Dan Murphy's. I think it's $59 you see it for. So yeah, hovers around that $60 range, but I think it's a really tasty whiskey. So this one here, it's really smooth, really sweet. There's no strong standout flavors. Like, if you get further into your whiskey journey, you'll come across types that some of the most common, I guess, flavor punches are things like sherry. So ones where there's been a bit of maturation in a sherry cask, things like that, something that Speyside, the region this is from, is pretty famous for. That's the type of whiskey I really like. There's also peated whiskies, so smoky whiskies. I like them as well, but they're a bit more of a time and place thing for me. So, you know, once you start getting into whiskey a fair bit, you'll identify the types of flavors that you're looking for. But something like this, I think he's just a really good all-rounder starting point. Kind of like vanilla-y, caramelly, malty. Yeah, just a classic whiskey and a really good price. Now, next on the list, going to give you an Australian whiskey. Now, like I've already established, it's pretty hard to make affordable whiskies in Australia. And when I came across this one, I was pretty stoked. So I've got a little sampler here just to have today because I didn't feel like grabbing another full bottle for the shelf. This is the Starward Twofold. This is a Victorian company, aged in red wine barrels. I love that for Australia. Like, we're a great wine country. We got a lot of great wine casks. I really enjoy what's going on with the wine barrel cask method being used in Australia because I just think it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, this one here, you get bottles of this for around the $65 mark. So again, very affordable. And yeah, first time I tried this, I was very pleasantly surprised. I was recommended this one. Now this company, they got some more expensive ones as well on my future to try list. First time I ever tried this, I was getting hints of caramel, vanilla. Okay, so comparing this to the monkey shoulder I just had, definitely, is my cat wanting food. Go away. Yeah, comparing this to the monkey shoulder I just had, definitely much more of a red wine influence. You really taste it. So call this a bit of a introduction to your sherry style kind of whiskies, but with the big added benefit, if you're based in Oz, that this is an Australian brand and it's really well priced. Like I said, in that $60 to $70 range. One of my only gripes with this is I think they could really improve the labeling and bottle design, kind of going for this space theme, which I'm not huge on, but anyway, it tastes really good. That's all that matters. So yeah, easy to drink, nice and sweet, but there's enough there to satisfy everyone, I'd say. Like, yeah, look, if you're a very seasoned whiskey enthusiast, you're probably going to find this not super complex, but purpose of this is a starting point and for things that are readily accessible in Australia for a decent price. And yeah, this really ticks those boxes. Oh yeah, the face tracking worked, went to the cat. Sorry for that interruption. Now, while I finish off this one, my next recommendation, I don't have on my shelf at the moment, but it was also one of the whiskies that really helped me get into drinking whiskey neat, and I think is good bang for buck for your shelf. And that is a Japanese whiskey, and it is Toki, made by Suntory. Now, Toki is in a pretty similar price range. It's slightly more expensive than the first two whiskies I've said. So we are kind of actually going up in price here. It generally goes monkey shoulder, then Starward. Toki comes slightly behind that, but not by too much. You get it for around $70 a bottle. And it's 43%. It's funny because getting into whiskies and hearing about the Japanese varieties and how good they are, I thought that the more I went on in my journey, the more I'd be finding more and more Japanese ones to try and things like that. But it hasn't actually been the case. And if you are wondering why on YouTube, for example, there's much less Japanese whiskies being talked about than Scotch, it's for the pretty simple fact that most Japanese whiskey is really expensive. And from my understanding of it, they've had pretty bad supply and demand issues, and they just never got to the mass manufacturing kind of capacity that Scotland has. So the Scots have a lot more variety for much better prices. And your journey with Japanese whiskey will come to a pretty abrupt finish unless you're looking to and happy to spend a fair bit of money. However, Toki is an exception to that rule. It's a mass manufactured, but really tasty option. Comes in a nice bottle. Yeah, like I said, it's a little bit higher ABV. That was the first whiskey I had neat and really enjoyed. It's really smooth. It has a bit less specific flavors than some of the other whiskies I've talked about so far. Like, my experience so far with Japanese whiskies is just that it's very smooth and refined, but harder to put your finger on specific tasting notes and flavors. But because of those reasons, it's also a really good one to grab as a starting point. I don't have that at the moment, and the reason I haven't bothered replenishing it purely for this is because this segues pretty well into my next one, which is the Nikka whiskey from the barrel. Now, this is a funny one because you might look at this and think it's a really premium whiskey. And as far as smoothness and everything goes, I would say it is. And also it's 51%. So yeah, pretty high ABV. It does come in a 500ml bottle, however. So this one's a little bit more expensive again. This is about another $10 more than the previous one. So you get this on special for around $80, sometimes a bit under. And yeah, you also see it in shops for $100. But get this for 80, and I think it's actually a really good buy. And it's a chance to try a higher ABV whiskey and another Japanese whiskey. The funny thing is, I'm mentioning 2 Japanese whiskies in this video. In future videos, you probably won't hear me talking about Japanese whiskies too much because I never went too far beyond this, to be honest. I've tried the other main whiskies out of Japan at restaurants and bars and things like that. So the Hibiki, the Cheetah, there's a few others. And I gotta say, after trying some of the much more expensive ones, so Hibiki is 180 in Oz. And like I said, this is 80. I personally think this is up there with that. I did a taste test one night. I was at a Japanese restaurant and I ordered a few different ones just to try it. And this one was actually my favorite. And so when it went on special, I grabbed a bottle. The other thing about this is it will make a great gift. That's a bottle that people love to have on your shelf. My day job is as a filmmaker, and sometimes I end up in pretty fancy houses, and I've quite often seen this on the shelf over the years and probably thought it was much more expensive than it was. Or maybe my price expectations have just adjusted a bit since getting into whiskey. I probably used to think that everything was $40. But yeah, I think this is a good one. Whether you buy it yourself as just a bit of a, I guess, a sample of a really smooth Japanese whiskey, or whether you get it as a gift. Yeah, surprisingly good value in what is a pretty kind of elegant package. Just gonna have a little taste of this. It's been a while. Like I said, I don't get the same tasting notes often with the Japanese whiskies that I've tried compared to their Scottish competitors. However, really smooth. Sometimes like this one is just like a end of night whiskey. Something else I'll let you in on if you're new to whiskey is what I've often found is bottles get better as you get further into them. And I don't mean as you get more drunk. There actually is a principle behind it that the more air that starts to get into the bottle, that it's at its peak at about the halfway point. And I have really found that myself, that flavors have really started to come out as the whiskey's gotten further down. This one being no exception. When I first got this bottle, I would say it had no flavor. Maybe that's unfair. It's very smooth, very easy to drink. You drink this, it definitely doesn't taste like a 51% ABV drink. It's really smooth. As I get into this, I actually taste a bit of smoke. I actually taste a bit of peat in there, or whatever method they're using, which I found interesting. I didn't taste that for the first half of the bottle, more or less, which is a cool thing about whiskey, and why it's been kind of the spirit that I've landed on. You're getting beyond the days of having shots of some nasty kind of rocket fuel. This is probably just my own personal taste talking, but mezcal and whiskey have been the two spirits that I've found the most variety and depth in. I haven't gone too far down the mezcal path. Yeah, I've just naturally ended up getting into whiskey in recent times. It's got a lot more bite. I know first getting into whiskey, a lot of people would say, oh, you need to get past the alcohol burn stage and get used to handling the taste of a spirit. I never really found that. It came pretty quickly to me, and a lot of people like to add a little bit of water. This is definitely a whiskey you could add a few drops of water to, or 5-10 ml, I guess. Up to you, try that out. But yeah, I'm sure if you added a little bit of water, more flavors might come out in this, but personally, I love it without water. I love that chest burn and the nice bitey kind of feel. So yeah, I'm just getting a bit of peat in this, and I guess just a classic whiskey taste, but not a Scotch taste. And I don't have the technical lingo to explain what that is, more so than it just doesn't really taste like Scotch. Just a really smooth whiskey. So yeah, probably not one you would have thought would end up on the best introductory kind of good value whiskey list, but yeah, surprisingly, I think it has its place. At $80 for something that packs a bit of a punch, I think it's pretty good. And it's a good one if you're starting to get a bit of a variety. An Australian, a Scotch, a Japanese, then yeah, I think it's a great one for your shelf, or a great one for a gift for someone that you know likes whiskey. So for the final one I'm going to recommend on this list, it's a pretty household name, and it's a whiskey company that I'm sure you've all heard of, but you'll be happy to know it lives up to the hype, and to me, it is a really tasty whiskey, and that is the Glenfiddich 12. Now, for a 12-year-old whiskey, I think this is really good value. So I actually just picked up this bottle to add back to the shelf today. This is only the second one I've ever bought. And I got it for $69, so just under 70. So right in the ballpark of all the other whiskies I've been talking about in this video. So this one here, it's just a classic Scotch whiskey. So bourbon cask and sherry cask, pretty common combo. That's exactly what this is. Comes in a really nice classic kind of bottle. And the first time I got a bottle of this, like what I was saying before, I found once I got into it a bit, the flavors started to really come out. I didn't get much at first. I only just opened this bottle. There's not a lot there at the moment, to be honest. So I guess just remember that sometimes you will get these whiskies and they will get a bit better over time. And also what you can do is leave your glass out for a little while, just let it breathe, you know, air it out. Oxygen kind of interacting with it really seems to help. You know, you don't have to go crazy. You're not just leaving it sitting out for ages or anything like that. But yeah, sometimes what I've done is when I've got these fresh bottles, I'll just leave the glass sitting there for 5-10 minutes before I have a sip. And that can really help. The thing I loved about this when I first got it was that I got a lot of really nice apple flavors that I hadn't got in other whiskies before. Green apple, I'd describe it. So Scotch was, yeah, some nice fruit flavors that came through a bit later. Now, I'm actually going to go add just a touch of water to this. And look, it's a 40%, so it's not my favorite technique to add water to something like this, but I think it just needs a bit of help bringing out those flavors. Okay, so I've added a tiny amount. See, what it does is air and water and things like that, what they can do is just bring down kind of the harsh notes. And that's why probably when you do have whiskey on the rocks, you don't experience that as much. But yeah, there's the apple. Now I've gotten into whiskey, it's not something that I would necessarily need on my shelf all the time because I'm now exploring all these different flavors and trying to tick off a bunch of other recommendations and yeah, really continue the journey into finding some unique flavors. But yeah, I think this is really good value, especially seeing 12-year age statement. Look, you're not going to get any Australian or Japanese whiskies that are 12 years old for an affordable amount of money. Now, there's other factors that come into that. There's different methods being used because of different climates and things like that. So a whiskey doesn't necessarily need to be 12 years old to be good. However, the fact that you can get something like this for a pretty affordable price, like I said, 70 bucks, it's a good buy. It's good as a gift or it's good for your shelf. It's just that classic Scotch with some nice fruity apple flavors. From the time this has been sitting there and adding a touch of water, those flavors really come out and it's much nicer than when I first cracked the bottle. So anyway, that's it. That's all for this one. Like I said, first video, testing the waters, but in the future, I'm gonna dive into some other types of whiskey I like. At some point, I'll do an episode just on Australian whiskies. I'll go more down where my path has led me to the types of flavors I like and some other recommendations I've got. But the whole philosophy behind this channel is ideally I want everything to be affordable within Australia. So I'll be talking about bottles that you can get from Dan Murphy's that are still in that affordable price range and things I look for and, you know, keeping an eye on discounts and being a member and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm just trying to keep this non-pretentious and a bit more targeted to the Australian market. And yeah, there's a bunch of exciting whiskies to talk about in future episodes. But yeah, cheers for watching. First ever video, Whisky Down Under. Thank you.